This isn't a meta tier list or a record pushing tier list. This is the pugging tier list, and there's some things we need to talk about. First of all, no matter how good a healer is on my tier list, I want you to know that if they don't know how to play the healer correctly, then they're not going to show up as an A tier or a B tier. They're going to feel inadequate. And same goes the other way around. If, say, you pick one of my higher tier pugging healers, and then you go into a key and everyone doesn't kick and nobody presses defensives, it doesn't really matter how good you are. There's just going to be some problems with pugging. And I also looked at the key range from around 11s all the way into 24s. While that is a wide range of keys, I found that there's no good range for just pugging, because I've been in 11s that have gone perfect, and I've been in 24s where I wondered how the players got to that level of keystone. It can never go perfect, you can never really predict it, so the range has to stay kind of wide. That's why it's important to remember sometimes a meta healer will be at the top of the pugging tier list because it's good. Sometimes the reason something is meta isn't necessarily what's good for a pug, and I hope that makes sense. And finally, this all comes from my own perspective. My name is BowserTheHealer, and I've ran thousands of keys as a solo healer. And while most of my experience is on Mistweaver and Preservation, I've gotten every single healer that's listed here all the way to Keystone Hero, some of them beyond, and I plan on getting them all to 3K and then top 1%. But I feel like I have a good enough grasp on all the healers that I can tell you kind of where they land in the pugging space, but there's going to be some variance, so I welcome you to the comment section to come and talk with me about your feelings and findings pugging with these healers. That being said, we're going to start from the bottom to the top to keep things interesting, and remember, while some of these healers might not be in the order you expect them, in coordinated groups and in good groups that play super well, I find all of these healers can get the job done for a very long time. So don't feel like you've picked the wrong healer. This is just more how successful or easy your life might be if you're pugging completely solo. Oh yeah, get subscribed. In C+, we have Holy Paladin. Holy Paladin does have a lot of good things going for it that I really want to touch on before I talk about why it's my lowest tier. First of all, Tears Deliverance is one of the coolest healing cooldowns in the game, and when you put this in a nice planned location where you know you can cover stuff for a while, you feel pretty unstoppable, and I really like the way that it functions and feels. When you combine this with things such as Hand of Divinity that gives you those instant Holy Light casts, it actually feels pretty great. Holy Shock as a cooldown might be a little annoying to manage, but the amount of healing that you get out of it, Divine Toll, and Daybreak with its mana regeneration feels pretty good, and those rapid fire Holy Shocks are actually just chef's kiss. I love those. The external defensives are also amazing on the Holy Paladin. You already have your 3% aura from Devotion Aura that just 3% DR for everybody, which is great. You can amp it up to be a real defensive for the whole party with Aura Mastery. You have Blessing of Sacrifice, Blessing of Protection, your own personal defensive, and your own bubble. And while it isn't a defensive lay on hands, maybe it's a 7-minute cooldown, but you can just pop someone's health bar to full in a moment's notice, which is great for saving someone's life. There is Avenging Wrath and Avenging Crusader. Avenging Wrath lasts longer and gives you more healing and damage and critical, which is great, but I prefer Avenging Crusader as a 1-minute cooldown because it lets me heal pugs a little more easily when I'm running out of resources. And that's sort of the problem with Paladin. It has good crowd control with its melee kick, Blinding Light for its AoE disorient, and of course Hammer of Justice, which is a fantastic stun. It's just lacking in healing when you don't have a cooldown running. And that's sort of where it falls apart. If you have everything in a planned and coordinated place, you can catch a couple of people as they fall and keep some of your squishier members alive when they have no business living. I think that's what makes Paladin really fun right now, but it has sort of a lackluster damage profile, and some of its moves like Flash of Light just don't feel very good. Holy Light has a super long cast time for what doesn't amount to be a strong feeling heal at all. And Word of Glory, in the words of my friend Asani, is sort of an insult to the GCD. It still costs mana, it doesn't do a lot of healing, and while I'll still use it because it is more mana efficient than my other heals, it doesn't feel very good. And what's the point of Light of Dawn? This used to be an AoE heal, and it used to be pretty nice in raid, but nowadays I don't even know if you're supposed to ever press this button. I can't think of a scenario where I'd rather press Light of Dawn than Word of Glory with Beacon of Virtue, and I don't know what they were thinking here. I like the whole Holy Power mechanic too. I think Shield of the Righteous actually feels amazing now as well. But when you are missing some of these feeling good things outside of cooldowns, it's tough. You can make your Word of Glory stronger standing in a consecration, which is the recommended way to cast the move, but it still doesn't feel good there either. And so I kind of hope Paladin receives a few updates to make it feel a bit better. For the long and the short of it, Paladin's all right. I don't recommend it over other healers for pugging, but if you are a good Holy Paladin player, or if you just love Holy Paladin, you can definitely make it work. It's just, if things start to fall apart and you run out of buttons, they really fall apart. In B-, we have Holy Priest. Holy Priest is actually quite a good pug healer. Heal and flash heal are pretty efficient heals and can let you catch people as they fall very quickly. But when you add in Holy Word Serenity, you can instantly heal someone for a ton of healing, reducing its cooldown whenever you cast the other healing spells. This feedback system actually turns into a perfect recipe for the kinds of things that go wrong on trash pulls in Mythic Plus, and I found that as I got more comfortable using the double charges of Holy Word Serenity and Holy Word Sanctify, that I was able to keep people up a lot easier. Not to mention that after the buffs to Prayer of Mending, having some good hands-off healing is always a boon as a healer, and I find that Prayer of Mending does a lot of decent work for me when I'm busy doing other things. Power Word Fortitude's going to give everyone more health, which helps with survivability, and Power Word Infusion gives you and a friendly teammate a big haste buff, one of the best cooldowns in the entire game offensively. Priest has some decent defensive capabilities, with flash healing yourself being a DR, Fade being a DR, and Desperate Prayer increasing your health by a significant amount. But Symbol of Hope is actually one of Holy's most unique things. You can give everyone back some of their personal cooldowns so they can actually get their defensives back a little faster. Guardian Spirit allows you to give somebody a cheat death. If the cheat death doesn't get popped, the move goes from a 3-minute cooldown to a 1-minute cooldown, and regardless of whether you pop it or not, they actually receive increased healing from you during that time period, which gives it a dual purpose. Now, one final thing to say about this spec that's amazing, the damage. The damage is actually through the roof, with Holy Fire being a ton of damage and Imperial Blaze allowing you to just slam targets for a little bit. If you have a bunch of paper ghost buddies out, the Idols of Naru, you can do a ton of damage on this spec, especially if PI is running and Bloodlust is running. I'm actually kind of blown away with the kind of damage you can get away with on Holy Priest, but there are some downsides. First and foremost, crowd control is sort of at a low. You have Holy Word Chastise, which is more of an offensive cooldown than anything, but it can incapacitate a target, which is great, but nothing to write home about. And Psychic Scream, while it is a 30-second cooldown, is, you know, the only AoE you have, and you have to be in melee for it, which can be a little tough as a ranged caster. Furthermore, the AoE healing isn't really good. Now, the emergency heals are good. Divine Hymn allows you to ramp boosted healing on targets for 15 seconds, and after it's done ramping, even your Holy Word Sanctify, which isn't the best AoE heal in the world, becomes actually pretty comparable, and you can do some good work with it. Apotheosis allows all of those holy words to cool down faster, and thus you can kind of get into this loop of slamming your Holy Word Serenities, your heals and flash heals so quickly, you end up getting your cooldowns back faster than you know it, and being able to heal more people even quicker. When there's a lot of damage coming in, that loop is actually unbelievably satisfying, and you feel sort of unstoppable when you have Apotheosis running. But that's it. That is all of the AoE you get. There's nothing else. So it's very hard to suddenly heal the whole party up. You don't have a rewind or a revival or anything like that. You can talent into Prayer of Mending, but the mana cost to healing ratio is pretty terrible. And I found that it was hard to use, and I was better off just using Apotheosis or sending some of my bigger buttons to heal people up. And I think making sure you have a ramped amount of Prayer of Mendings out really makes a difference, because when those are jumping around, people really do heal a lot more. And I think that's worth it. But yeah, it's in B- specifically because of that lack of AoE healing. If your group is good and knows how to use defensives, then Holy Priest is actually amazing. And in all the other scenarios, it's one of the best pug healers because it can catch people so easily. But that downside is, in AoE, if players aren't playing their cards right, it can be so hard to keep them alive and yourself alive during a major mechanic. So be cautious, but I think a lot of people are sleeping on Holy Priest, and I actually have a video about why I think people are sleeping on Holy Priest that's going to be coming out soon. B tier is shared by two different healers, but I want to start with the one that's a sibling to Holy Priest, and that's Discipline Priest. Discipline Priest is a meta healer right now, and it's actually quite a strong one. But why isn't it higher up on my pug healing tier list? Well, that's because when it isn't being perfect, it's actually a bit of a struggle, especially when it falls behind. So, unlike Holy Priest, the AoE healing on Discipline Priest is amazing. You deal damage to heal, and what's not to love about that? You still have Power Word Infusion, you still have Power Word Fortitude, and with Holy Word Radiance allowing you to give everyone Atonement and everyone healing, you can very quickly and very easily heal up large groups of people. If you know when the damage is coming in, you can set up, react, and blast. And that's, I think, one of the coolest parts about Disc. Penance is an amazing move in that you can either AoE heal the whole party via doing damage through Atonement to heal, and that's really good, or you can use Penance on a single target to heal them if, say, one player needs a lot more healing. That flexibility is really nice, and with the low cooldown of Penance, you're not often picking between healing one person and healing the whole group, and I think that's my favorite part about it. The defensives are just as good on Holy Priest as they are in Discipline, but in addition, you get pain suppression and 2 charges of it, one of the best damage reductions in the game at 40%. So you can just pain sup someone who's dying, and then their life is a lot easier. And not to mention Power Word Barrier. It's a 3-minute that provides a 20% damage reduction zone for 10 seconds. So you can just drop this on the party, and as long as everyone positions, they can have access to a very nice damage reduction on top of whatever else they have running. It's not all sunshines and rainbows. There is no Holy Word Chastise here. It's just Psychic Scream, and that's really tough in the crowd control department. It's actually one of the reasons I'm happy my priest is a panda. I don't normally pick my character's race for competitive reasons, I just like pandas, but having the extra Quaking Palm has been a godsend, because having only 1 CC ability and 0 kicks never feels good, and it's probably the worst part about the spec. Where it falls apart really is just, yeah, let's say somebody takes damage and you have to heal them, and oh, somebody missed a kick and now you need to pop an extra radiance, and now you're behind a mechanic, and oh, here comes the next mechanic. You have to use your rapture and you have to pre-ramp everyone, but that's still going to be 5 global cooldowns, and yeah, you just start falling behind, and eventually things will fall apart. It's not as easy to fall apart as, say, with Holy Paladin, but it's still pretty easy. But if the group is even remotely competent, you're actually going to feel on top of the world as Discipline Priest. I have it in B tier because it would be closer to A tier if it had no problem delivering atonements. This isn't, I think, Cataclysm, where you didn't have to worry about applying atonement. It just sort of worked, and you have to actually make sure you use a spell to give someone atonement, and I think that's what adds to its problems when you're not calculated. My friend Gloop once said that Discipline Priest really is the professional healer. You plan it, you put it where it needs to go, and if you're playing with a bunch of really good players, it'll work perfectly. But if you're playing with a bunch of amateurs, it's not always as pretty, and it's important to remember that as a disc player. But it is still very fun to pug with, and I really enjoy pugging with it myself, so give Disc a try if you've ever been interested. And sharing B tier with Discipline Priest is Preservation Evoker. Preservation Evoker is one of my special healing specs. It's the one that I think I'm known for, and I really like it in pugs, but it's not easy. And I think if everything works in your favor, this is actually straight up an A, even A+ healer for pugging. However, it's never that easy. If you have a whole melee composition, you'll feel it. You don't ever have to deal with positioning issues. Everyone's always where you need them to be, and the healing is just absolutely breezy. But if you have a boomkin and a hunter standing on opposite sides of the room during the last boss fight of Everbloom, you've probably screamed once or twice in a dungeon on Tyrannical, and that's sort of my point. This spec is really good, but because players need to be in position, it can get really hard. Now, one player out of position isn't necessarily super hard to deal with. Outside of the Everbloom boss, honestly, having everyone even remotely in range is pretty manageable. You might need to be able to reposition and make it work, and you know what? I've made lots of scenarios work despite it being suboptimal. But that's a lot of work just to heal people. And then furthermore, the hardest part about preservation isn't even just the positionals, it's the communication. You have to tell someone to stand there, and if there's a language barrier, that gets even harder. Furthermore, you can rescue people and then use the ping arrow to try to tell them that you're trying to get them to stay in. And I've had players in a 22 run all the way back to where I rescued them from and then die and then write healer. So it can be a little frustrating. The other really hard part about preservation, and I'm trying to leave individual healer difficulty out of this one, is that you have to be always on the ball, sort of always creative, easily adaptable, because preservation's nothing but cooldowns. Other healers have their out of cooldown healing and their in cooldown healing, but preservation is always online because it has a million cooldowns. The only move always available to you is Living Flame. And while Living Flame is a lot better of a heal than it used to be, it's not better than flash heal by any means. And thus you end up in these scenarios where, oh, let's say you use your dream breath with a temporal anomaly, but then the whole party just took damage. Okay, well, just send your spirit bloom in a single echo. Okay, that worked, but now other people are dying. Okay, I guess full charge your flame breath and use the leaping flames to heal people if the fire breath didn't heal them. Okay, that's great. Somebody else just took damage. Okay, Verdant embrace them. Okay, now the tank's dying. Okay, echo reversion them. Okay, everyone took damage again. I don't know, cry. You just start running out of buttons. So if you're not willing to adapt and change your combos on the fly to deal with a scenario, or if you misuse a resource in trying to quickly save someone's life, you could end up just without the resource. And that's kind of tough if you ask me. So preservation on a good day, it's like 8 here. Genuinely awesome. It's got a kick, it's got crowd control, it's got wonderful defensives in the form of Zephyr and time dilation being one of the best externals in the game. They bring bloodlust, they have movement. There's so much that preservation brings to the table that's honestly awesome. But let me tell you, when it doesn't work, it feels terrible, and it can be really stressful when players aren't playing well with your ranges and with your limitations. So play this one at your risk, but I really like it, and when it works, I still feel like I'm on top of the world, and that feeling is enough to keep me playing it. In B+ tier, I have Resto Shaman. I've really taken a liking to Resto Shaman. It wasn't my favorite for a while there, but after learning about the Riptide build and giving it a little more time, I really enjoy it now. It has plenty of emergency cooldowns. While 3 of them are 3 minutes and 1 of them's a 2-minute, you can kind of back to back them to cover mechanic after mechanic, and it feels really good. Spirit Link Totem is one of the best heals in the game, as it just sort of evenly distributes health bars, which is a 10 out of 10 for me. Healing Tide Totem is just a strong heal over time that can help you through mechanics, and Ascendance is the big one, turning you into a water ascendant and duplicating your heals at 80% efficiency. This means you can just start blasting whatever heal you prefer, and you'll just be chunking your entire party all the way up back to full. It's very powerful. One of the most unique of them, though, is Ancestral Guidance, which is a little different on Resto Shaman compared to the DPS side of things. For the next 10 seconds, 25% of your healing and 25% of your damage is converted to healing on up to 3 nearby injured allies or raid members, up to 158,000 healing to each target per second. That cap isn't really important because that's a lot of healing, and this is only a 2-minute compared to the other ones, which are 3 minutes. So you have a way to cover something almost all the time, and it is very powerful. You also have Cloudburst and Healing Stream Totem if you would like to choose a different totem for healing. One of them is burstier, one of them is a heal over time, and different players might like different ones. Primordial Wave makes it so that you can cleave heal everyone with a Riptide, as well as providing a Riptide on the target that you Primordial Wave, which feels really good. And Earth Shield, which allows you and somebody else to have an Earth Shield on them and receive 20% increased healing, as well as a little bit of healing whenever they take damage. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, this has saved my life more than a few times. Somebody receives the Etch spell from, say, Wakecrest Manor, you pop an Earth Shield on them, and you start slamming a few healing surges and Riptides, and it's much easier to heal than normal. I really like what Resto Shaman brings, and it doesn't stop there. The damage is good. You can just drop your healing rain on some enemies for some acid rain damage, and you're done. That's good enough damage. But you can also hit Stormkeepers and just blast some massive chain lightnings, as well as your Flame Shock and Lava Burst. Becoming instant cast every once in a while is a very fun talent that you can grab. The damage is good, the healing is good. It's just that the AoE is only okay until you pop a cooldown, but even with the AoE healing just being okay, with enough Riptides, you can kind of make anything good. The crowd control is fantastic, with Wind Shear being a 12-second kick that's ranged. That's unbelievably powerful. Capacitor Totem is a small delay to it, but it's a very good stun. Earthbind Totem remains goated when it comes to Spiteful Weeks and helping you run away from the little ghosts, and Hex will let you deal with Incorporeal, but Afflicted Week is where you really shine. Poison Cleanse Totem lets you just take care of the afflicted, because every 1.5 seconds it dispels something, and whether it's a poison or an afflicted, it doesn't matter, it'll get the job done. Let's talk about the downside. Defensives. You got one. You got Astral Shift. It's a 1.5 minute cooldown. You take 40% less damage. It's strong. It's like really strong, but that's about it. There's a few other DRs in the tree, but nothing that we're about to right back to home about how wonderful it is. It's just a little tough out here. You are wearing mail armor, which it makes you a little bit thicker than other healers, but sometimes you just explode on this spec and you don't have a defensive and it sucks. However, I think with a good composition, they can cover you in terms of group defensives and you can survive most things just fine. I forgot to mention Bloodlust. Yep, they bring a lust, just like Preservation Evoker. On to our last two healers. Both of them are in my A- tier, and let's start with Restoration Druid. Restoration Druid is really only with one flaw, and that one flaw being that it doesn't have a snap the finger, instantly heal the party kind of button. But that being said, since it got Grove Guardians, they don't really need it. Grove Guardians allow you to have some hands-off healing and quickly amp up a certain player that's taken damage, but now it even does AoE healing with current talents in the tier set, so what's not to love? Their only real emergency heal is Convoke the Spirits, which sometimes you're using to do damage, so it's just inconsistent. You press this button when people are hurt and it'll heal, but sometimes it ramps a little bit more and sometimes it does more upfront healing. And being random, I don't really recommend it as like a go-to emergency heal, but at least you got one. The damage profile is fantastic, whether you cat weave, you boomy weave, or you do mixed weaving. It's all really good. The damage is solid, and because of the damage over time effects of both of these styles of DPS, you can swap in and out of healing very easily. But it's the ramp, it's that incredible healing over time that's provided to you by using your wild growths and your life blooms and really stacking up your mastery that lets you just heal through anything. If I'm being honest with you, Flourish is now a 1 minute, so you can extend the duration of those heal over times and boost their effects. And with the new tier set, you even have a little bit more spot healing whenever you get your life bloom procs on your regrowth. Your battle res is also available, and you can make an instant cast with a nature swiftness to make it even more effective. But not only can you battle res, but you can give them a 20% DR with Iron Bark. Furthermore, you have Bark Skin yourself, which can be used while you're actually incapacitated or in any of your shape-shifting forms, so it's pretty versatile. But you have Bear Form. Bear Form just turns you into the tank form, which means extra health, which means it's this always online defensive, and you can make it even stronger if you're talenting more into the melee side of things. But between the playstyle diversity and the tons of healing over time, you can kind of survive almost anything in the game. Swift Mend really does make the difference though, whenever you need to instantly heal someone, and it's not like it's a problem when you have to hit regrowth once or twice. As long as you're not only relying on regrowth, there's a ton of healing in this kit, and I highly recommend it. Restoration Druid's a 10 out of 10 for me right now, and yes, it is meta and it is being played quite often, but it's been strong in the pugging department even at the end of last season, so give it a try if you've ever been down to learn all the buttons that it has. And finally, also in A-, we have Mistweaver. Mistweaver has a lot of good things going for it, but I want to note, while it is meta right now, it's been good for a while in Dragonflight, because it's always provided crazy good healing throughput. So the changes that really ascended it was Ancient Teachings of the Monastery, your fist weaving healing, now heals evenly split among 5 targets. This made it a lot easier to know where your heals were going, and because of our new defensiveness from this patch, it's very quick for us to just heal ourselves up to full. Now there's 4 targets. Heal someone else up to full. No, there's 3 targets. Okay, now fist weave. The tank puts themselves to full, and now you're only fist weaving 2 targets back to health. And it's a lot more efficient than it ever used to be. And that's, I think, a huge boon to the spec, but so is Shayloons, which is basically an always online good group-wide heal, emergency button, if you will, that only takes about 30 to 40 seconds to generate to a point where it's a pretty amazing heal that's worth pressing. While the damage on Mistweaver is good, the fact that they can cleave heal and get more healing out of their fist weaving is pretty neat. But you can also just spin on enemies. If the target count's high enough and enough people need healing, sometimes spinning crane kick healing on a Fey line is actually better than anything else you can do. Revival also happens to be a best in slot emergency heal, as it's just a quick mass dispel for magic, diseases, and poisons, and providing a big heal. What's not to love? Your Celestials, Yulon, and Chi-Ji are also amazing 1 minute cooldowns that you can use to ramp a ton of healing and make it through just about anything in the game. And while Chi-Ji is better in dungeons, Yulon's is still very good, so you can kind of get away with running both of them. Yulon and Chi-Ji, whenever activated, also provide a nice little shield for everyone. You also have Life Cocoon, which is one really big shield for someone, but there's no damage reduction that's external. You can't give someone a pain suppression. if you will, on Mistweaver. It just doesn't have that, and it's one of its downfalls. No bloodlust, no battle res, no externals that aren't just shields. So while it's good, it's mostly known for its crazy good throughput, and that's what keeps pugs alive. The other really best in slot part about this spec is the crowd control. While Druid also has really good crowd control, you have a melee kick that you basically always talent into, you have leg sweep for a nice big AoE stun, paralysis, which can set up for wonderful little skips, with Ring of Peace, which is maybe one of the best crowd controls in the game, as it just knocks everyone inside of it out of the Ring of Peace. Use it for skips, use it to stop lots of mobs. It's fantastic. There's a lot of fun to be had on Mistweaver. Also in the talent tree, you'll find that it has a teleport. Now, all of Monk has a teleport, but you can actually do some really neat things like save the tank with a taunt and then a teleport, or, you know, pull something for someone and then warp behind a wall. And these little utilities are actually quite useful in Mythic Plus, and I find every season there's always one or two cool little things that it can use with Transcendence. Furthermore, Close to Heart and Save Them All are some of the best talents in the game, providing bonus healing for people close by, and when they get low, I can't stress enough just how much work that actually does for your team. And so while Mistweaver is meta this season, it's been strong for a while, and I highly recommend if you like it now, you'll probably like it in later seasons and expansions. I really hope they can keep this vibe all the way into War Within, but that's just because I'm a Mistweaver stan. Like I said, this tier list is pretty deliberate. Paladin's at C+, not because it is bad, but because it is above average. It's just not easier than other healers, but you can definitely make it work. I know I do all the time, and I kind of get away with murder some keys. On the flip side, Restoration, Druid, and Mistweaver, they might be meta, they might be strong, but they're not A or A+ because they're not perfect. They have flaws, and all of the healers are kind of hard. So there's no real world where there's a healer that just does it all and is perfect. So I want you to pick something with your heart. How hard do you want to work is an important metric. And in that regard, let me tell you about if you're new to healers. I think Resto Shaman and Holy Priest are great entry-level healers, as the basic game plan makes a whole lot of sense, and a lot of the advancements and mastery that come with it is a nice gradual learning curve. It isn't too crazy, although Holy Priest does get really fast, and Shaman isn't quite as fast if that's important to you. Resto Druid and Holy Priest have a lot to learn at first. It's a big entry fee, if you will, but once you get it, I feel like they're smooth sailing, Druid being slightly easier than Holy Paladin, but they both are quite easy once you understand their general flow. Mistweaver, Discipline Priest, and Preservation are the tough ones. Discipline Priest is probably the hardest healer in the game because you have to both be a DPS player brain and a healer brain, and you have to do it all really well calculated, and that can be hard, but don't let that deter you. If you like the way Disc plays, it's 100% worth learning, as the DPS side of it isn't as hard as, say, like a full-time DPS, and the healing side of it, while complicated, once you're in your flow, it's so simple to, like, oh, press Radiance now and then do my damage rotation, and I find that to be a very comfortable flow. But when you're first learning it, there's so much going on, and learning the pulls can be a little tough with Disc, so just be prepared for that. Mistweaver's a lot easier in that, yeah, you have to be a DPS and a healer, but the DPS side is much easier. However, the healing side's a bit tougher in learning how to ramp and read the heals and where your heals are going to go. There's a lot of optimizations on Mistweaver, and I've spent so much of my time optimizing this spec. I just know how long you can sit there and stare at the buttons and find a new way to do something just a little bit better. So Mistweaver, it gets deep. So while it isn't as hard as Disc, it's still pretty challenging. Preservation's hard because of the non-stop creativity. Again, that adaptation, constantly coming up with new combos and learning how things work together. Once you've explored it enough, it's a lot easier, but it requires that you remain sharp at basically all times of the day. And some people might not like that. The positioning requirements alone, and having to go yell at people to position correctly, and that's not everyone's cup of tea. So I just want to note the healers that are a bit harder. Again, if you want to learn them, I think it's worth it, because I've loved playing every single one of these healers, and I'm going to continue pushing them into that 3K in top 1% territory as the season progresses. So if you have any comments, let me know. I'd love to hear what you think about the list, and any of your own personal lists if you want to throw it together. But again, this was all for pug content, not necessarily for group content, unless your group, again, isn't very good at the game and you need to carry them a whole lot. But I'd like to think that our groups are better than that, and Thus, I think this tier list is for the solo player, or maybe plays with just one other friend that wants to have an idea of how much harder they could be working or how much easier they could have it. So there you go. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.